speech will be 10 to 12 minutes. Rachel Dick is a registered nurse and holistic life coach. Her passion lies in utilizing storytelling as a medium for healing. Her speech is entitled Absolution, as in, I grant you absolution.
Yes.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost.
More or less.
Catholic, you can tell. Thank you, Rachel.
So, a few years ago, I was working my third and final night shift of the week. I came to the shift feeling a bit groggy, kind of shaking off that daytime nap. You'll like this patient, Rachel. He's interesting. Super interesting. The guy loves history. He'll talk your ear off. I was getting a report from my coworker, Lenny, who used to work with me on night shift. He just turned 60 and had switched to day shift to spend more time with his adult daughters and his grandchildren. He fills me in on the details of an 81-year-old gentleman who was admitted for cellulitis in both legs. And this gentleman was also diabetic and had a plethora of medical issues and comorbidities. Make sure you wear an isolation gown when you go in the room. The guy's got that nasty bacteria MRSA in the wound on his foot, Lenny said to me. I round on my 5 patients and I leave this gentleman for last. This is a common nursing strategy when you know you have a patient who's going to talk a lot. You leave him for last, tuck everybody in, make sure everyone's okay, and this way if you get tied up in the room, you know all your patients have been settled for the night. So I walk into this gentleman's room and I launch into my usual spiel. I have given it 1,000 times before. Good evening, my name is Rachel. I'm going to be your nurse until 7 a.m. This is your call out. Just press the button if you need anything. Let me know. I start bustling around the room and organizing the things on his bedside table and just making sure everything's in order. And as I'm putting my name on the board, I hear this gentleman introduce himself. Good evening, how are you? So nice to meet you, Rachel. Something about this man gets me curious. Do I detect an accent? Where are you from? I love hearing my patients' stories. His response surprised me. I'm from Germany, the land of the Nazis and all that. That's a very strange way to introduce oneself. I felt a jolt go through my body and a squirmy discomfort washed over me. It's a really weird way to introduce yourself. My response poured out of me before I could think too hard. I was casual, almost flippant, and I said to him, I wouldn't know anything about that. My grandparents just went through Auschwitz. My thoughts quickened. Is that inappropriate? I could picture the inside of the HR rep's office. Another voice inside me retorts, maybe, but he started it. An awkward pause follows. I think Rupert and I both know that we hit a tripwire. Perhaps we're also realizing that we have a similar sense of humor and a lightness with which we approach dark subjects. I tactfully switch gears. I ask him if he has any pain. I say, do you need any ice water? Is there anything I can get you? And shortly after that, Rupert and I just fall into an easy conversation. Lenny was right. This guy does love history. He launches into an account, an analysis of the First and Second World War, all the details and the strategies and the politics and the politicians. I feel my body relax a little bit. His self-taught historian style reminds me of my father. He always said that if life circumstances had been different, he would have become a history professor. My childhood memories involve a tome from Sir Martin Gilbert or Paul Johnson of my father's nightstand. The shift passes like any other. I tend to my 5 patients. I catch up on the gossip at the nursing station. And I find myself fighting off that exhaustion that starts to descend between 2 and 4 a.m. in the morning. But the whole night, Rupert is on my mind. That comment he made about being from the land of the Nazis was on my mind. It kept percolating. As the first rays of sunlight were gently beaming into the room, I head to Rupert's room to check his IV and change his dressing. I put on the crinkly blue disposable gown, I put on my gloves, and I head into his room. He's sleeping fitfully in the recliner. As I walk into the room, the smell of decomposing flesh hits my nostrils. He's sleeping fitfully in the recliner, and his swollen legs are protruding out in front of him like decaying tree stumps. His eyes open gently when he sees me. "Rachel, how are you? How's your shift going?" I can hear the affection in his voice. The history lesson that I was expecting materializes. Right around the time that Rupert's explained to me why the United States finally joined the war, his storytelling turns personal. Of course, I had done the math. I always do when I have an elderly German patient. My mind goes there. Where were you during the war? What was your family doing when my family was being butchered and gassed? Yes, it's morbid, but I think it's natural for anyone whose family has been impacted by genocide. If my childhood was a movie, the Holocaust was the background music. The stories that my grandparents shared with me were a constant reminder to be grateful for the comfortable North American life that we lived. The ghosts of deceased relatives were everywhere. On the walls of my grandparents' dining room, in the rituals at every bar mitzvah, and in that little synagogue we prayed at that smelled like old people and overcooked potato kernel. I was a little boy during the war. I was about 6 when it began, Rupert shares with me. They sent me to the countryside. They wanted to keep me safe. There's a long pause. My grandfather was an SS officer. My father and all my uncles were SS officers. It hurts me in my heart to think about what they were doing during that time. I don't know how to respond. I don't have to. A runaway tear rolls down Rupert's cheek. He looks helpless, sitting there in that big chair like it was swallowing him up. His shoulders have shifted forward and his hands reach under his glasses and squeeze his eyes, almost as if to push that tear back where it came from. I've lived with this guilt my entire life. The burden of shame I have carried with me everywhere. I love these men. I looked up to them. This was my grandfather, my uncle, my father. But it kills me when I think about what they were doing, the darkness that was in their souls. I feel a pressure in my chest. My hands are trembling slightly. I'm having conflicting feelings of distress and empathy. I know it's my job to take care of this man, but I'm fighting an urge to flee the building and never return. The man before me is from a family of SS officers, actual Nazis. But here we are, 2 human beings just having a conversation in a hospital room. 2 people trying to wrap their heads around one of the greatest atrocities ever committed in the history of mankind. My mind flashes to a story that I heard recently about a German-Nigerian woman who discovers in her 30s that she is the grandchild of Amon Earth, the Nazi depicted by Ralph Fiennes in the movie Schindler's List. She talks about the distress and the guilt, the burning guilt that she felt when she discovered that her grandfather was a Nazi, and also the sadness and distress that she experienced when she realized that if her grandfather, a Nazi, had met her, a black woman, in the streets, he would have shot her in the head. I pause at Rupert's revelation. I turn to him, choosing my words more carefully now. He wants my absolution. We both know that it's not mine to give. And yet he wants it anyway. And so I find it within myself to give it to him. Rupert, it's hard to comprehend. I feel my voice catch in my throat. The world had gone mad. And Rupert, none of us choose our circumstances. We are not responsible for the actions of other people. It's not really my place to issue you forgiveness, but I know that if my grandmother, my Oma, was in this room, that's exactly what she would do. He looked up at me and I could see his eyes were glistening with tears in the dimly lit room. You have no idea what that means to me. His shoulders dropped, and a sigh left his mouth. He put his head into his large hands, and he began to sob. I never saw Rupert again after that night, but I think of him often. I know that that meeting was divinely orchestrated. This man waited his whole life to hear those words. And he spent his whole life with that guilt festering inside of him. It's like he waited his whole life to